The grand hall of the Coalition flagship Eternal Dawn was filled with noise and light. Thousands of soldiers from 12 different species stood together, drinking and laughing and celebrating. They had just won. The Battle of Novus Prime was over, and the Drath swarm had been pushed back once again. Commander Vex stood near the center of the hall, surrounded by admirers. He was tall, even for a Taurani, 8 feet of blue scaled skin and muscle. His eyes were gold, and they had seen 200 years of war. Tonight, everyone wanted to shake his hand. Everyone wanted to thank him. The official reports said that Commander Vec had turned the tide of the battle. They called him a hero. Vec accepted the praise with quiet nods. He raised his glass when others raised theirs. He smiled when he was supposed to smile. But his mind was somewhere else. His gold eyes kept moving across the crowded hall, searching for something. He found them in the corner. The humans sat at a small table near the far wall. There were only 9 of them. Captain T sat in the middle, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was not a large man. By Taurani standards, he was almost small. His black hair was cut short, and there was a fresh scar across his left cheek. He did not look like a hero. He looked tired. Next to him sat Lieutenant Hana. She was younger than T, with sharp eyes that never stopped watching the room. On his other side was Sergeant Wu, a thick man with burns on his arms and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The humans were not celebrating. They sat in silence, drinking slowly. Sometimes one of them would say something quiet and the others would nod, but there was no laughter at their table, no joy. Vec watched them for a long moment. Then he felt a hand on his arm. Commander Vec. He turned to see Officer Kell pushing through the crowd toward him. She was young, barely 40 years old. Her scales were a lighter blue than his, and her eyes were bright with excitement. Kell was one of the new soldiers, fresh from the academy. She had survived her first real battle today, and she could not stop smiling. Commander, I wanted to thank you personally, Kell said. If you had not led that counterattack, we would all be dead. You saved us. Vec looked at her young face. He remembered being that young once, that hopeful, that certain about how the universe worked. We all played our part, he said. Kell nodded eagerly. Yes, of course. Though I am glad the humans were assigned to the secondary position this time. No offense to them, but they are so fragile. It must be difficult being so weak in a war like this. Vec's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his gold eyes. He said nothing. Another officer nearby heard Kell's comment and laughed. His name was Tor, a veteran of 60 years. Fragile is the right word, Tor said. I have never understood why the Coalition even allows humans in combat units. They break so easily. Short lives, soft bodies. They are barely useful for anything except support roles. Several other Taurani nearby made sounds of agreement. One of them joked that humans were only good for carrying supplies. Another said that their only real skill was dying quickly. Vec listened to all of this in silence. His hand tightened around his glass. Across the hall, Captain T looked up. His eyes met Vec's for just a moment. There was no anger in the human's face, no offense, just a quiet understanding, as if he had heard these words 1,000 times before. Lieutenant Hana leaned close to T and whispered something. T shook his head slightly and returned to his drink. Vec set his glass down on a nearby table. The small sound was quiet, but somehow it cut through the noise around him. The officers nearby stopped talking and looked at their commander. I need to say something, Vec said. His voice was not loud, but it carried. Heads turned. Conversations faded. The Taurani knew that voice. It was the voice Vec used before battle, the voice that meant something important was about to happen. Vec walked toward the raised platform at the center of the hall. His steps were slow and heavy. The crowd parted before him like water around a stone. By the time he reached the platform and stepped up onto it, half the hall had gone quiet. He looked out at the sea of faces. Taurani with their blue and green scales, the tall, thin Marathi with their silver skin, the four-armed Keth, the insect-like Vorn, so many species all united against a common enemy, all celebrating a shared victory. And in the corner, 9 humans who were not celebrating at all. Brothers and sisters of the coalition, Vex said, his voice echoed through the hall. Tonight we celebrate a great victory. The Drath have been defeated at Novus Prime. Many of you fought bravely. Many of you lost friends. This victory belongs to all of us. The crowd made sounds of approval. Glasses were raised. Vec waited for the noise to die down. Then he continued. But before we celebrate further, there is something I must tell you. Something about our allies. Something about the humans. A murmur ran through the crowd. Eyes turned toward the corner where the humans sat. Captain T looked up, his expression unreadable. Lieutenant Hana's hand moved slightly toward the weapon at her hip, an instinct she could not control. I have heard what many of you say about them, Vex said. I have heard you call them weak, fragile, barely useful. I have heard these words for decades and I have never corrected them. That was my mistake. The hall was completely silent now. Every eye was on Vec. Officer Kell looked confused. She glanced at Tor, who shrugged. Tonight I will tell you the truth about humans, Vex said. Not because they asked me to. They would never ask. They do not care what we think of them. I am telling you because you need to know. Before the next battle, before we fight beside them again, you need to understand what they really are. He paused and looked directly at the human table. Captain T held his gaze. Slowly, the human raised his glass in a small salute, then drained it in one swallow. I have fought beside humans for 80 years, Vec continued. I have seen them do things that made no sense to me, things that frightened me, things that made me question everything I thought I knew about war and survival and what it means to be alive. Admiral Rin, the ancient Marathi who led the coalition fleet, stepped forward from the crowd. His silver face was curious. Commander Vec, what exactly are you trying to tell us? Vec turned to face the Admiral. His gold eyes were hard. I am trying to tell you, Admiral, that we have been fighting beside monsters. But they are our monsters. And if we are going to survive this war, everyone in this room needs to understand what that means. He turned back to the crowd and took a deep breath. Let me tell you about humans, the real truth, and I warn you now you will not sleep well tonight. The celebration had stopped. No one was drinking anymore. No one was laughing. Every being in that hall was staring at the legendary Commander Vec, waiting to hear what could possibly be so important about the quiet, small, fragile humans in the corner. And in that corner, Sergeant Wu leaned over to Captain T and whispered, I think someone finally noticed. T did not smile. He just poured himself another drink and waited. The silence in the grand hall was heavy. Thousands of soldiers stood perfectly still, waiting. Commander Vec looked out at their faces and saw confusion, curiosity, some annoyance. A few of the younger officers were already crossing their arms, ready to dismiss whatever he was about to say. Vec had expected this. He pressed a button on his wrist device, and a large holographic display appeared above the platform. It showed a small blue and green planet, spinning slowly in the darkness of space. This is Earth, Vec said. The human homeworld. How many of you know anything about it? A Marathi officer near the front spoke up. It is a small planet, mostly water. The humans achieved spaceflight only 300 years ago. They are one of the youngest species in the coalition. Correct, Vec said. What else? Another voice called out. They have short lives, 80 or 90 years at most. Their bodies are soft. They cannot survive in extreme temperatures. They need to eat and sleep constantly. By any measure, they are one of the weakest intelligent species in the known galaxy. Several beings in the crowd laughed. Even some of the younger humans at the corner table smiled slightly, as if they had heard a familiar joke. Vec did not smile. Yes, he said, all of this is true. By every physical measure, humans should not be a threat to anything. They should have died out on their homeworld millions of years ago, but they did not. He pressed another button. The holographic display changed. Now it showed images of Earth's history. But these were not images of great achievements or beautiful cities. These were images of war. Explosions, fire, soldiers in primitive armor fighting with swords, ships burning on oceans, aircraft dropping bombs on cities, mushroom clouds rising over destroyed landscapes. The crowd watched in growing silence. Some of the younger officers looked uncomfortable. The Marathi were known for their peaceful nature, and several of them turned their faces away from the images. This is human history, Vex said. I spent years studying it. What you are seeing is not a collection of rare events. This is the normal state of humanity. They have been fighting wars against themselves since before they could write. Millions of their own kind, killed by their own kind again and again for thousands of years. Officer Kell raised her hand. Commander, this just proves that they are primitive. They could not even achieve peace among themselves. How does this make them anything but savages? Vec looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. That is what I thought too at first, but you are missing the point, officer. Most species achieve peace before they reach the stars. They have to. War is too destructive, too wasteful. Logic demands cooperation. He pointed at the holographic display. Humans never achieved peace. They reached space anyway. They built starships while they were still pointing nuclear weapons at each other. They learned to travel between worlds while they were still killing each other by the millions on their own world. The display changed again. Now it showed a human timeline marked with major wars. The numbers beside each war showed the death tolls. World War I, 20 million dead. World War II, 70 million dead. The Resource Wars, 90 million dead. Do you understand what this means? Vec asked. They did not evolve past violence. They evolved through it. War is not something humans do. War is what humans are. A heavy silence fell over the hall. The Keth commander near the front shifted his forearms uncomfortably. But that still does not explain anything, Tor said, the same officer who had called humans fragile earlier. Being violent does not make them strong. It just makes them dangerous to themselves. Vec nodded. You are right. This alone does not explain anything. So let me tell you the first truth. The thing that took me 30 years to understand. He stepped closer to the edge of the platform and looked out at the crowd. Humans are not fragile. They are not weak. They are simply accustomed to being broken. The words hung in the air. Many in the crowd did not understand. Vec continued. 30 years ago, I fought in the Battle of Horizon Station. It was one of the worst battles of the Drath War. A small station on the edge of Coalition space, barely defended. The Drath sent an assault force of 2,000 soldiers to capture it. The station's garrison was 500. We knew we could not hold it. The holographic display changed to show the station. A small metal structure floating in the darkness of space, surrounded by Drath warships. The evacuation was almost complete when the Drath broke through the main gate. Most of our soldiers retreated to the escape ships, but 12 humans refused to leave. They volunteered to hold the main corridor so the evacuation could finish. Officer Kell's eyes widened. 12 humans against 2,000 Drath. Yes, Vex said. I was there, I saw it happen. I ordered them to retreat. Captain T, who was just a sergeant then, looked at me and said, someone has to stay, might as well be us. Every eye in the hall turned to look at Captain T in the corner. The human was staring at his glass, not looking up. The humans held that corridor for 19 hours, Vex said. Every single one of them was wounded in the first hour. Gunshots, burns, broken bones. I watched Sergeant T take a blade through his shoulder and keep fighting. I watched a human woman named Bo hold her position with 3 broken ribs and a collapsed lung. I watched them bleed and scream and refuse to fall. The hall was absolutely silent. By the end, only 3 humans were still alive. T was one of them. The corridor was filled with dead Drath, over 200 of them, killed by 12 wounded humans who should have died in the first 10 minutes. Vec's voice was quiet now, almost soft. I asked T how they did it, how they kept fighting when any other species would have surrendered or fled. Do you know what he said to me? No one spoke. He said, "We got angry." Vec let those words settle over the crowd. Then he continued. That is the first truth. When most species are hurt, they retreat. They protect themselves. It is the logical response. But humans do not work that way. When humans are hurt, when they are broken, when they are pushed to the edge of death, something changes inside them. They do not become weaker. They become more dangerous. Lieutenant Hana finally looked up from the corner table. Her sharp eyes moved across the crowd, watching their reactions. Other species have a limit, Vex said. A point where pain becomes too much and survival instinct takes over. Humans have that limit too, but they can ignore it. They can push through it. They can be bleeding and broken and dying, and they will keep fighting out of pure, burning rage. Admiral Rin stepped forward again. His silver face was troubled. Commander Vec, you make them sound like animals, mindless beasts driven by fury. Vec shook his head. No, Admiral, that is not it at all, and that is why the first truth is so frightening. They are not mindless. They are completely aware of what they are doing. They know they are dying. They know they cannot win, and they choose to fight anyway. He looked toward the human table again. Humans do not fight because they think they can win. They fight because losing makes them angry. Dying makes them angry. Being told they cannot do something makes them angry. And when humans get angry, they become something else entirely. Captain T finally looked up. His eyes met Vex across the crowded hall. There was no emotion on his scarred face, just a tired acceptance, like a man who had long ago stopped being surprised by anything. The humans on Horizon Station did not hold that corridor because they were strong, Vex said. They held it because they refused to let the Drath take it. They were too stubborn to die, too angry to give up. He paused, and that is just the first truth. That is just the beginning. Officer Kell's voice was small when she spoke. Commander, you said there were more truths. What else is there? Vec looked at her young face. He saw the fear growing in her eyes. Good, he thought. Fear was the appropriate response. The second truth is worse, he said. The second truth is the one that still gives me nightmares, even after 80 years. In the corner, Sergeant Wu poured himself another drink. He had not said a word since the speech began, but there was something in his eyes now, something dark and distant, like he was remembering things he had tried very hard to forget. The crowd waited. No one moved. No one spoke. They had come to this hall to celebrate a victory, and now they stood in silence, learning that everything they thought they knew about their allies was wrong. Commander Vec took a deep breath and prepared to tell them about human endurance. The real kind. The kind that had made him, a 200-year-old warrior, wake up screaming in the middle of the night. The grand hall had changed. The mood of celebration was gone completely. Soldiers who had been drinking and laughing just an hour ago now stood in tense silence. Many of them had moved closer to the platform, wanting to hear every word Commander Vec spoke. Others had stepped back, as if distance could protect them from what they were learning. Vec looked out at their faces and saw fear beginning to form. It was the right response. He had felt the same fear himself many years ago, when he first began to understand what humans really were. The second truth, Vec said slowly, is about human endurance, not their ability to survive, something much more dangerous than that. He pressed a button on his wrist device and the holographic display changed. It now showed a diagram of human biology, muscles, bones, internal organs. The crowd studied it with confusion. Look at this body, Vec said. It is exactly what you said before, soft, weak. No natural weapons, no protective shell, no regeneration. By every measure, humans should be easy prey for any predator. A Vorn officer clicked his mandibles. Then, why are you showing us this, Commander? We already know humans are physically inferior. Vex smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because you are wrong. You look at this body and see weakness. You are missing what makes it truly terrifying. He zoomed in on the human legs. Humans evolved as pursuit predators. Do you know what that means? They did not have claws or fangs or venom, so they developed a different hunting strategy. They would pick a target and chase it, not fast like a sprint, slow and steady for hours, sometimes for days. The crowd murmured. The Marathi looked confused. Running for days, that seemed impossible for such a weak species. Their prey would run, Vec continued. It would escape easily at first, but humans would keep following. The prey would run again, and humans would keep following. Eventually, after hours of this, the prey would simply collapse from exhaustion. Its body would give out, and the humans would walk up to it and kill it with rocks. He let that image settle. This is what humans are designed for. Not power, not speed. Endurance. They are built to keep going when everything else has stopped. Their bodies can run for entire days without rest. They heal from injuries that would cripple other species. They can function without food or water or sleep for periods that would kill a Torani. Officer Kell shook her head. But Commander, that is just physical endurance. It does not explain why they are dangerous. You are right, Vex said. Physical endurance alone is not the second truth. The second truth is this: human endurance is not passive. It is the most aggressive thing about them. He changed the display again. Now it showed a recording from a Drath prison facility. The image was grainy and old. This is Colony 9. 15 years ago, the Drath captured this colony and took prisoners. Among them were 3 humans. Sergeant Wu was one of them. Every eye in the hall turned to look at Wu. The thick man with the burned arms did not look up. He just kept staring at his drink, his face like stone. The Drath commander wanted information about coalition defenses. He had a method for extracting it: psychological torture, isolation, sensory deprivation, chemicals that cause hallucinations and terror. These methods had broken soldiers from a dozen different species. Even the strongest minds usually cracked within 2 weeks. Vec paused. His gold eyes were distant, remembering. The Drath kept the humans for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of their worst techniques. And do you know what happened? No one spoke. The Drath commander requested a transfer off the station. He filed a report saying that the prisoners were psychologically unstable and potentially dangerous to personnel. One of the guards had suffered a mental breakdown and could no longer perform his duties. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. The prisoners had broken their guards. I read the full report after we liberated the colony, Vex said. The Drath tried everything: darkness, silence, pain, fear. Nothing worked. After the first week, the humans stopped responding to the torture at all. They just sat there and waited. He looked at Wu again. After the second week, they started talking back, mocking their captors. Sergeant Wu reportedly asked his torturer, "Is that all you have?" while grinning through broken teeth. Another human kept making jokes about the food. The third one started singing human songs at the top of her voice for hours at a time. A sound came from the corner table. It took a moment for the crowd to realize what it was. Lieutenant Hanna was laughing quietly, a soft, bitter laugh that faded quickly. The Drath did not understand, Vec continued. Their techniques were designed to break the mind by removing hope, but humans do not work that way. They do not need hope to keep going. They can survive on spite alone. He stepped to the edge of the platform. The second truth is this: humans weaponize their own suffering. When you hurt them, they do not break. They turn the pain into fuel. They become more determined, more stubborn, more dangerous. Every wound you give them makes them want to hurt you more. Admiral Rin held up a thin silver hand. Commander Vec, you are describing something that sounds like madness. No rational being would function this way. You are correct, Admiral, Vec said. It is madness. That is exactly the point. He changed the display one more time. Now it showed human cultural artifacts, movies, books, songs, stories. Look at what humans celebrate. Look at their heroes. They are not stories of easy victories or peaceful times. They are stories of suffering, of impossible odds, of people who were beaten down again and again and refused to stay down. He pointed at specific examples as he spoke. They tell their children stories about soldiers who froze to death rather than retreat. They sing songs about ships that sank with all hands rather than surrender. They make movies about athletes who compete on broken legs. Their entire culture glorifies endurance through pain. The crowd was completely still. Many of them were beginning to understand, and the understanding was terrifying. When a human is suffering, Vec said, they do not think, how do I make this stop? They think, how do I use this? Pain is a resource to them. Hardship is fuel. They have spent their entire existence on a planet that tried to kill them, and they survived by learning to love the struggle. Captain T finally spoke from his corner. His voice was calm and quiet, but in the silence of the hall, everyone heard him. We have a saying on Earth, he said. What does not kill you makes you stronger. Most species think that is a metaphor. For us, it is literally true. Vec nodded. That is the second truth. Humans are not survivors despite their weakness. They are survivors because they have learned to transform weakness into strength. Every disadvantage becomes an advantage. Every failure becomes motivation. Every wound becomes a reason to fight harder. Officer Kell's voice was very small when she spoke again. Commander, you said the first truth was frightening. You said the second truth was worse. Is there more? Vec looked at her with something like pity. Yes, officer. There is more. The third truth is the one that will truly disturb you, because the first truth tells you that humans are dangerous when hurt. The second truth tells you that they cannot be broken. But the third truth is the one that will make you understand why the Drath are afraid of them. He paused and looked out at the silent crowd. The third truth is about calculation, because humans are not mindless berserkers. They are not driven by pure rage or madness. Everything they do, every terrible thing is deliberate, planned, intentional. They have turned their own brutality into an art form. In the corner, Sergeant Wu finally looked up. For the first time since the speech began, he smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who knew exactly what Commander Vec was about to say because he had lived it himself. The crowd waited. The celebration was long forgotten. Everyone in that hall knew they were about to hear something that would change how they saw their human allies forever. Vec took a deep breath. The worst truth was still to come. The grand hall felt smaller now. The thousands of soldiers from a dozen species seemed to press closer together, as if seeking comfort in numbers. Commander Vec stood alone on the platform, the holographic display behind him showing nothing but darkness. The third truth, Vec said, is the one that truly separates humans from every other species in the known galaxy. He looked out at the crowd. He saw the fear in their eyes, the confusion, the growing understanding that everything they had believed about their allies was wrong. Good. They needed to understand this. Their survival might depend on it. Most species fight for logical reasons, Vec said. Survival, territory, resources, protection. These motivations make sense. They can be calculated. When the cost of fighting exceeds the benefit, rational beings stop fighting. They surrender, they retreat, they negotiate. He paused. Humans do not work this way. Admiral Rin stepped forward again. Commander, you have already told us that humans are driven by anger and spite. Surely that explains their illogical behavior in combat. Vec shook his head slowly. No, Admiral, you are still missing the point. The first truth told you that humans become dangerous when they are hurt. The second truth told you that they cannot be broken. But the third truth is the most important of all. He pressed a button on his wrist device. The display lit up with a military portrait, a human woman with short gray hair and cold eyes. This is General D. 20 years ago, she commanded coalition forces during the siege of the Keth Corridor. It was one of the most important strategic positions in the war. The Drath had committed massive forces to capture it. We were outnumbered 5-1. The display changed to show a map of the corridor. Red icons representing Drath forces. Blue icons representing coalition forces. The blue was badly outnumbered. Our military advisors calculated the situation carefully. They determined that holding the corridor was impossible. The optimal strategy was to retreat. We would lose the corridor, but we would preserve 70% of our forces for future battles. It was the logical choice, the correct choice. Vec looked at the crowd. General D refused. A murmur ran through the hall, refusing a logical retreat. That was insanity. I was there when the admirals confronted her, Vec continued. They showed her the calculations. They explained that fighting was pointless. They told her that she was condemning her soldiers to death for nothing. He paused, remembering. General D looked at those admirals with eyes like ice, and she said something I have never forgotten. She said, "They will expect us to run. I want them to learn what happens when they expect us to run." The holographic display changed to show the battle. Blue icons pushing forward instead of retreating. Red icons beginning to fall. The humans counterattacked. Not to win, not to survive. They counterattacked to send a message. They charged directly into the Drath formation, taking horrific casualties. 60% of their forces were destroyed in the first 3 hours. Vec's voice was hard. But they destroyed the Drath completely. Every single enemy soldier in that corridor was killed. General D did not just win the battle. She erased the enemy from existence. The crowd was absolutely silent. And here is the third truth, Vec said. Humans are not driven by rage. They are driven by spite, and spite can be calculated. He let those words hang in the air. General D knew exactly what she was doing. She knew the cost. She knew how many humans would die. And she decided that cost was worth paying because she wanted the Drath to be afraid. She wanted them to know that attacking humans would always be more painful than it was worth. He pointed at the display. For the next 2 years after that battle, Drath forces hesitated at every engagement with humans. They had learned, not that humans were strong, not that humans were skilled. They had learned that humans were willing to die in massive numbers purely to hurt their enemies. Officer Tor, the veteran who had called humans fragile at the start of the night, spoke up. His voice was uncertain. "But Commander, that is just one battle, one general. Surely it is not representative of all humans." Vec laughed. It was a cold sound. "You want more examples? Fine. Let me tell you about human history." He changed the display to show Earth again, but now it showed nuclear weapons, missiles pointed at the sky. 300 years ago, before humans reached the stars, they developed weapons that could destroy their entire planet. Not just cities, not just nations, the entire planet, every living thing burned to ash. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Many species had developed such weapons and immediately dismantled them. Such power was too dangerous to possess. Humans kept them, Vex said. For over a century they pointed these weapons at each other, not at enemies from other planets, at themselves. They called it mutually assured destruction. The idea was simple: if you attack us, we will destroy everything. You will kill us, but we will kill you too. No one wins. Admiral Rin's silver face had gone pale. That is madness, absolute madness. Yes, Vec agreed. It is. And it worked. For 100 years, those weapons kept the peace, because every human nation knew that every other human nation was willing to destroy the entire world rather than lose. He looked at the Admiral directly. Do you understand now, Admiral? Humans invented the concept of mutually assured destruction. They do not fear it. They embrace it. The idea that if I cannot win, nobody wins is not a threat to them. It is a promise. Lieutenant Hannah stood up from the corner table. Her voice was calm, but it carried across the silent hall. Commander Vec is correct. We call it making them pay. It does not matter if we win. It matters that our enemies never forget the cost. We would rather die hurting our enemies than live having surrendered to them. She looked around at the crowd. This is not rage. This is not madness. This is strategy. Cold, clear, deliberate strategy. We know exactly what we are doing. We choose to do it anyway. Vec nodded. That is the third truth. Humans use terror as a weapon. They are willing to sustain catastrophic losses purely to send a message, and they do it on purpose, with full awareness, with calculation. He changed the display one more time. Now it showed casualty reports from various battles in the war. Human losses were always high, but enemy losses were always higher. Look at these numbers. Every battle where humans have fought, they have taken heavy casualties, but their enemies have taken heavier ones, every time, because humans do not fight to survive. They fight to make their enemies regret ever starting the fight. The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then a Vorn commander spoke up, his mandibles clicking nervously. Commander Vec, if everything you say is true, then why are the humans our allies? Why have they not turned on us? A species this dangerous, this ruthless, surely they would seek to dominate or destroy. It was the question everyone had been thinking, the question that hung over the entire hall like a shadow. Vec nodded slowly. That is the right question, and it leads to the final truth, the one that explains everything else. He looked toward the human table. Captain T was watching him now, his scarred face unreadable. There is one more thing you need to understand about humans, one more truth that I have saved for last. It is the only reason I can sleep at night, the only reason I trust them at all. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Because everything I have told you should terrify you. Humans are weapons that refuse to be controlled. They are spite and fury wrapped in fragile bodies. They are the most dangerous species I have ever encountered. Vec's voice softened slightly. And yet they fight beside us. They die for us. They have never once turned their terrible power against the Coalition. Why? He looked at T again. The final truth will answer that question, and it is the only truth that matters. In the corner, Captain T slowly rose to his feet. He did not walk toward the platform. He simply stood there, waiting, watching, as if he knew exactly what Vec was about to say and he wanted to see how the crowd would react. The hall held its breath. The final truth was coming. Dawn light was beginning to stream through the viewports of the Grand Hall. The celebration had lasted all night, but no one had celebrated for hours. Thousands of soldiers stood in exhausted silence, processing everything Commander Vec had told them. Vec looked out at their faces. He saw fear, confusion, uncertainty. These were soldiers from a dozen different species, united against a common enemy, and now they were learning that their most mysterious allies were far more dangerous than any of them had ever imagined. It was time for the final truth. When I first fought beside humans, Vec said, his voice quieter now, I was afraid of them. Not because they were strong, because they were unpredictable, because everything they did defied logic. He stepped to the edge of the platform. I kept waiting for them to turn on us. A species that dangerous, that ruthless, that willing to sacrifice everything for spite. Surely they would eventually see the Coalition as a threat. Surely they would try to dominate or destroy us, just as they had dominated and destroyed so much on their own world. He paused. I was wrong. The crowd stirred. This was not what they had expected to hear. I spent years trying to understand humans, Vec continued. I studied their history. I fought beside them in dozens of battles. I watched them die. I watched them kill. And slowly I began to understand the final truth, the truth that explains everything else. He looked toward the human table, where Captain T stood silently. Humans do not fight for themselves. They never have. Every terrible thing about them, every brutal trait, every piece of spite and fury, all of it exists for one purpose: to protect the people they love. A murmur ran through the crowd. This did not match what they had heard before. Vec raised a hand for silence. Think about what I have told you. Humans evolved as pursuit predators. They learned to keep going when everything else stopped, but they did not survive alone. They survived in groups, in tribes, in families. Their endurance was never about individual survival. It was about keeping their people alive. He changed the holographic display. Now it showed images of human families, human communities, people helping each other, protecting each other, sacrificing for each other. Their aggression is the same. Yes, humans become dangerous when they are hurt. Yes, they can weaponize their own suffering. But look at when they do this. Look at why. It is always in defense of others. It is always to protect something they care about. The display changed to show the battle they had just won, the Battle of Novus Prime. Let me tell you what really happened yesterday, Vex said. The official reports say that I led the counterattack that turned the tide. They say I am a hero, but that is not the full truth. He took a deep breath. My unit was on the front line when the Drath broke through our defenses. We were surrounded, cut off from reinforcement. Death was certain. I had made my peace. I was ready to die. The crowd listened in absolute silence. Then the humans arrived. He pointed at the display, where small blue icons were moving toward the surrounded position. Captain T and his unit were assigned to hold a secondary position far from the main battle. Safe, defensible. Their orders were clear: hold that position no matter what. They had no obligation to help us. He looked at T. But T saw that my unit was in danger, and he made a choice. The display showed the human icons abandoning their safe position and charging toward the surrounded Torani forces. 23 humans left their assigned position and ran directly into an impossible situation. They did not calculate the odds. They did not consider the strategic value. They simply saw allies dying and refused to allow it. Vec's voice grew rough. 16 humans died to save my unit. 16. They knew they would probably die. They came anyway. The hall was absolutely still. Many of the soldiers were staring at the small group of humans in the corner with new eyes. I was wounded in the fighting, Vec continued. A blade through my side. I could not walk. I thought I would die there bleeding in the dirt. And then Captain T appeared. He looked at T directly. This human, this small, fragile human, lifted me onto his shoulders and carried me half a mile through enemy fire. A Torani weighs 3 times what a human weighs. He should not have been able to carry me, but he did. Step by step, while bullets flew around us, while his own people died, he carried me to safety. Vec's gold eyes were bright. When we reached cover, I asked him why. Why would he risk his life for me? Why would he sacrifice so many of his own people for a Torani he had barely spoken to? He paused. Do you know what he said? No one spoke. He said, "You were in trouble." The words hung in the air. Simple words, 3 words, but in that moment they carried the weight of everything Commander Vec had been trying to explain. That is the final truth, Vec said. Humans are terrifying not because of their ferocity or their endurance or their calculated spite. They are terrifying because they direct all of that power toward protecting what they love. And if you are lucky enough to be counted among the things they love, they will burn down the universe to keep you safe. He turned back to the crowd. Humans did not survive their deadly world by being the strongest. They survived by forming bonds so tight that they would die for each other without hesitation. Their aggression is not random. It is protective. Every brutal trait exists because humans needed to protect their families, their friends, their tribes. He spread his arms wide. We are their tribe now, the coalition, all of us. When humans look at us, they do not see aliens. They do not see tools or resources or potential threats. They see family. And there is nothing in this universe more dangerous than a human protecting their family. Captain T finally moved. He walked slowly toward the platform, his boots echoing on the metal floor. The crowd parted before him in silence. He stepped up onto the platform and stood beside Commander Vec, the legendary Taurani warrior and the scarred human captain, side by side, an impossible partnership that had saved countless lives. T spoke, his voice was calm and clear. Commander Vec has told you the truth about what we are. We are not easy to understand. We know that. Our history is bloody. Our instincts are violent. We feel things more intensely than we can control sometimes. He looked out at the crowd. But here is what I want you to know. If you are our friend, you will never have to ask if we will come when you need us. We will, every time, without hesitation, without calculation, because that is what humans do for the people they love. He looked at Vec. Commander Vec saved my life once, 20 years ago on a planet I cannot even pronounce. He did not have to, he could have left me to die, but he stayed, he fought, he bled for me. T's voice grew stronger. From that day forward, he was family. And yesterday, when I saw his unit surrounded and dying, there was no decision to make. There was no calculation. There was only the need to protect my family. He turned back to the crowd. That is what humans offer the coalition. Not strength, not skill. We offer everything we are, every terrible, brutal, stubborn thing about us. And we offer it in defense of you, all of you. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, something began to change. Officer Kell stepped forward. She looked at T with new eyes, eyes that held no pity or condescension, only respect. She raised her hand in the traditional Taurani gesture of brotherhood. T smiled slightly. He reached out and took her hand in a human handshake instead. "Let me show you how we do it," he said. Kell laughed. It was a surprised sound, but warm. Around the hall, similar moments began to happen. Marathi officers approached the human table. Keth warriors offered gestures of respect. Vorn commanders clicked their mandibles in approval. Sergeant Wu finally smiled, a real smile this time. He shook hands with 3 different species in the space of a minute. Lieutenant Hana found herself surrounded by curious officers asking questions about human customs and culture. Admiral Rin approached the platform. His ancient silver face was thoughtful. "Commander Vec," he said, "thank you for telling us this truth. I think perhaps we needed to hear it." Vec nodded. "I should have told it years ago, Admiral. We have been fighting beside humans without understanding them. That was dangerous for all of us." Rin looked at T. "Captain, on behalf of the Coalition fleet, I apologize for any disrespect your people have experienced. You have earned our admiration many times over." T shook his head. "No apology needed, Admiral. We do not fight for admiration. We fight because you are our people now. That is enough." The celebration resumed, but it was different now. There was a new energy in the hall, not the false joy of earlier, but something deeper: understanding, connection, trust. As the dawn light grew stronger through the viewports, Commander Vec and Captain T stood together at the edge of the platform, watching their peoples finally begin to see each other clearly. Vec poured 2 drinks and handed one to T. "To family," he said. T raised his glass. "To family, whatever form it takes." They drank in comfortable silence. 2 soldiers who had seen too much death, two warriors from different worlds who had found in each other something rare and precious. Lieutenant Hana approached them, smiling. "Commander Vec, why did you finally decide to tell everyone? You have kept these truths to yourself for decades." Vec looked out at the hall, where soldiers from a dozen species were finally treating the humans as equals, as brothers and sisters in arms. "Because I am tired," he said. "Tired of watching my people underestimate yours. Tired of seeing humans die while others do not appreciate their sacrifice. You deserve to be understood, even if the truth is frightening." T nodded. "The truth usually is." Hana laughed. "Well, it worked. I think we might actually be part of the coalition now, really part of it." Wu joined them, a drink in each hand. "Does this mean people will stop calling us fragile?" he asked. Vex smiled. "I think after tonight, no one will ever call humans fragile again." Wu grinned. "Good. I was getting tired of proving them wrong the hard way." The four of them stood together as the celebration continued around them. Torani and Human, old enemies who had become the closest of allies. Family, forged in blood and fire and mutual sacrifice. Outside the viewports, the stars stretched endlessly into the darkness. Somewhere out there, the Drath were regrouping for their next attack. More battles were coming, more death, more loss. But standing in that hall, surrounded by allies who finally understood them, the humans of the coalition did not feel afraid. They felt ready. Because in a galaxy full of terrors, humans were the scariest thing on their side. And somehow that was comforting.